myself, just like you, we're stuck in this system rigged against us. Our entire culture is built on the almighty dollar. The minting on our coins, quote, "In God we trust," is laughable for the irony that such an admirable motto is printed on the actual God in which we trust. Why do we value work so much? That's the question I want to explore today. So let's do this. Travel back in time with me anywhere between, say, 12,000 and 300,000 years ago to the age of the hunter-gatherers, before humans began to farm the land and build societies all around agriculture. Got to get my little hunter-gatherer here. This period in the evolution of Homo sapiens marks the most significant chunk of time in our evolution and contributed significantly to the formation of these brains that we now have today. For instance, high-calorie sweet foods were extremely rare during this time. So should you, say, stumble upon a fig tree ripe with fruit, you would gorge yourself to stock up, not knowing if or when you'd get another chance. Now, this survival craving formed tens of thousands of years ago. It helps to explain why you don't really need to crush that entire pint of Ben & Jerry's, and yet the craving and the urge is unsatiable nonetheless. Chunky monkey. But setting aside how our brains are wired for this sweet caloric consumption, I want to say a quick word about how our brains might also be wired for work. Specifically, how we've come to think about work and what we value most. Now, the average tribe of our hunter-gatherer ancestors might put in, for example, a few hours in the morning of hard work as soon as the sun came up to gather nuts and berries and check the rabbit traps. And then they might be home by noon to cook the meals and prepare for the next day, which then provided plenty of waking hours to play with the kids, to tell stories around the fire, and simply enjoy the company of those they did life with. In his book, titled Sapiens, Yuval Noah Harari writes this. He says, "The wholesome and varied diet, the relatively short working week, and the rarity of infectious diseases have led many experts to define this pre-agricultural forager societies as the original affluent societies." Well, sure, you might occasionally get eaten by a tiger or swallow the wrong kind of mushroom, but this idea of work was relatively constrained. Life was more or less about finding food each day, shelter as you needed it, and then strengthening the relational bonds of the tribe. All right, now let's fast forward a couple 10,000 years or so into agricultural societies. And we'll keep it simple just for math, and we'll say from about ancient Greece, 400 BC, on up to the 16th century. And here's another interesting tidbit about work. Experts estimate that by the mid-16th century, probably around 165 days a year, which isn't including Sundays, so we can go ahead and throw in 50 there and round up to about 220 days a year, were designated as celebrations and festivals. And during these holy days or holidays, and during these seasons, you know what people didn't do much of? Yeah. Work. So this 2,000-year period might be called an agrarian feudal economy. And this is the time where most people didn't really own land or property, but they worked it for a local lord, or they trained to work in a local guild providing goods for just your own little region. And while life could certainly be harsh and brutal, and most people were really poor, again, when it came to this idea of work, most people worked the land and their craft for only about a third of the year, because everything was tied to the rhythms of the land, or to the light of the sun, and to the aforementioned holy days calendar. Now, I'm not saying that the hunter-gatherer life of the plains of the savannah, nor the agrarian medieval farmer life of the hills of Britain was the height of human happiness. No, I'm not saying that. In fact, for all of our issues in society today, and obviously we have many, I happen to agree with President Obama, who said, well, actually, instead of me quoting him, I'm just going to show you a clip, because who doesn't enjoy a good Presbyterian clips these days?
Sometimes because we have so much information from all around the world, on our televisions, on our computers, on our phones, it seems as if the world is falling apart. Right? Because we're always getting information about there's a war here, and there's a terrible environmental disaster there, and there's conflict here, and this horrible issue's happening, and everybody's shouting, and everybody hates each other, and you get kind of depressed. You think, goodness, what's happening? But the truth is that when you look at all the measures of well-being in the world, if you had a choice of when to be born, and you didn't know ahead of time who you were going to be, what nationality, whether you were male or female, what religion, but you said when in human history would be the best time to be born, the time would be now. The world has never been healthier, it's never been wealthier, it's never been better educated, it's never been less violent, more tolerant than it is today.
You're welcome. We all just enjoyed seeing President Obama and listening to him. But yeah, I agree with what he just said. In this macro view of human history, now is a pretty good time to be alive. And yet I was thinking about that because, like with all gains, it doesn't come without a cost. And I think that one of the biggest costs that we have and are paying is our relationship to work. This week I was reading about how the 16th and 17th centuries across Europe brought this transition away from what I mentioned earlier, this agrarian feudal economy, to a more, what we now call a capitalist economy, where wealth was no longer owned by rich landowners, but instead the production of all the goods was controlled by these merchants turned capitalists, who slowly moved society away from here's your home and your plot of land to work and serve your local community, and toward here's your one little role to do in this factory to mass produce this thing that we'll then export and make all the money around. This was when was birthed this idea of the hard-working, low-skilled wage worker. And during this transition of time, here's a quote from this article that I read from this group called the Solidarity Federation, which is a group formed throughout England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland, whose aim is to abolish capitalism in the state. And they write this about this period of time. They say, viewed from our modern advanced industrial perspective, submitting to the routine of going to work daily for a set number of hours, usually inside a building, that appears the norm. But from the perspective of a 16th and 17th century peasant, however, this routine would have been alien. So now we live in a world where the norm is something like a working week of 40 to 60 hours a week, usually at a job that we don't love, for wages that aren't livable, and in an industry that doesn't really need or value us. And my point is, this is a relatively new phenomenon in terms of how humans relate to work, where instead of working to ensure that our basic needs are met and then enjoying the rest of what life has to offer, we exhaustingly work to earn money, hoping that we can acquire enough to meet our needs, with almost little or no time or energy left over for non-work enjoyment. And this pursuit of money, both so that we can survive and so that we can acquire material goods, combined with our cultural program of expecting that you work for a majority of your waking hours, it is, in my opinion, not a recipe for human flourishing. So while I think Obama might be right, and never before has our world been less poor, less hungry, less sick, better educated, more equitable, more just, and is at the same time, though, a system rigged for us to work and work and chase and believe that this is what life is all about. We've been told that the actual point of life is just do things and get things until at some point in the future when you, die. And we fear death because, of course, when you die, you can no longer do things or get things, which, if we've been convinced is the point of life, then yeah, of course, we would fear death. All of this, then, it shapes what we value. All of this, then, shapes what we value. And that's what I got to thinking this week when Kate and I were planning for this morning's virtual service. And she said to me, I think you should talk about what we value and why. And so my mind went to this idea of work and money and then cavemen and feudal economies and the benefits of and detriments to capitalism. In one very crude sense, you might say that our brains, over the course of hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, developed this intricate balance of work and play, of valuing what we need to survive along with what we need to thrive. And even when we started building bigger and bigger civilizations, we still arranged our lives around the rhythms of nature and religious festivals, so that work, though it was still hard and strenuous and brutally challenging at times, also wasn't the sole purpose in life. We had space to value other things like love and connection and beauty and art. And then I got to thinking about the ancient Israelites. The ancient Israelites who, under the whip of Pharaoh, were reduced to nothing more than makers of bricks. Day and night. Bricks, bricks, bricks. Their worth was simply a measure of how many bricks they could make for those who wanted to enjoy life but not have to work for it. So part of the liberation of Israel was a liberation of being defined by what you make, what you can produce, how much wealth you can create for others. And then part of the purpose of Sabbath rest, which was a beautiful advancement to the technological livings of humanity via the Jewish people, part of the purpose of Sabbath rest was to reset their rhythms of being people who'd only ever known work. It was this forced reminder that life is not about doing things and getting things. And then I was thinking about Jesus, and I'm like, I don't think it's any wonder that Jesus had more harsh things to say about money and the pursuit of money than anything else. It's as though he knew deep in his being that a life pursuing wholeness and well-being and flourishing is on an entirely different trajectory than a life pursuing wealth and riches and material goods. In fact, he once said this: you cannot serve two masters. You cannot serve both God and riches. God, however you want to define it, him, her, and riches are two different masters ordering your life in two different ways, creating two opposing sets of values. Now today we hear these words and it's like it goes in one ear and out the other because our entire world for the past 300 years has had one singular goal: make more money. Work harder, increase profits, exploit workers if needed, just make more money. Now, we may not always know which master we're serving. I certainly don't always know. I can say, well, I'm serving God, but those are just my words, and I'm not always the most reliable narrator of my own life. So instead, what I can do is I can step back and look at my actual life, the actual way that I'm living. That often gives me a better indication of which master I'm serving. And then what do I find when I do that? Well, I find that I spend most of my waking hours, or at least most of my conscious waking hours, working. Working. To do stuff and to get stuff. And part of that is because myself, just like you, we're stuck in this system rigged against us. Our entire culture is built on the almighty dollar. The minting on our coins, quote, "In God we trust," is laughable for the irony that such an admirable motto is printed on the actual God in which we trust. Life is more than doing things and getting things. Life is more than work. Life is more than riches. And yet we live in a world, in a society that can't accept these truths. We have these ancient brains that know that life is about more than just doing and getting and working and spending. It's kind of like how when Apple keeps on updating their operating system to newer and faster software, but you still have this old phone that suddenly gets bricked because it can't keep up with the new system. Capitalism, the worship of work, the pursuit of wealth, the serving of riches, all of this is a very new operating system that our ancient bodies, our ancient brains weren't designed to run. So why am I saying all this? What is my point? Maybe it's this. That ache that you sometimes feel deep in your bones, that life has to be more than this, more than overtime and multiple jobs and the constant hustle. That sense that lingers just outside your consciousness that it doesn't seem like this is right. Because even when you do get what you work so hard for, even when you make that extra money, buy that fancier thing, it strangely doesn't bring the satisfaction we at once both anticipated and also had a sneaky suspicion wouldn't actually come. Because we know, deep down, we know. And I wonder if that ache, that sense, that knowing, is all just life's way of calling us back to what is. Grounding us in the real, in the here and the now. Lately, guys, I have been so tired because I've been working so hard, chasing, hustling, trying to figure out, like you, how to make enough to live on. And I know you're doing the same thing, and it is inherently exhausting. We are not made for this, literally. And yet we live in a world that needs us to think otherwise, that needs us to chase, to do, to spend. And I guess for me, what I'm needing right now is to worship God rather than riches. And maybe I can do that even in the smallest ways by choosing to value something other than work. By choosing to value something other than doing and getting. Maybe my practice is this, just to say out loud, I want to value something different. I want to place value on playing this game with my wife right now. I want to place value on doing this activity with my kids. I want to value reading this fiction book, sitting in this chair, listening to the crooning of Dean Thomas while sipping this Sazerac. It is very specific, thank you. Years ago, I heard this definition of the term Sabbath, and it stuck with me. And it's this. Sabbath is divine permission to accomplish nothing. Divine permission to accomplish nothing. This is what Sabbath is. It gives us the gift of reminding us that we're not merely worth the bricks that we can make. Sabbath is our opportunity to come back to this one truth that I love how my friend Ryan Meeks has put so brilliantly, and it's this. Life is a gift, and love is the point. So this week, however your Thanksgiving or no Thanksgiving turns out to be, whatever your Black Friday and holiday shopping experiences are in the coming weeks, may we be intentional to find moments or to make moments, or actually not find them, to make moments, to purposely value that which the world wants you to ignore, and to ignore that which the world wants you to value. Amen.